Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Emily Moyer and this is Project Kids number 8. Michael Wan is with me and it's been quite a few weeks since we've done one that was just us. We had our group a few weeks ago and whatnot, but it's been, I think we had like an extra week in between than we normally do. So it's been about a month since it was just you and I. So I'm excited to have one of our interesting windabout conversations here. How you doing, Michael?
I am doing well. It does seem like it's been a long time. Like time is always a hard thing for me to judge. And so like as you're saying, I'm like, God, I don't know how long it's been, but yeah, it does seem like it's been a while since, and I think it was the last time we did, I sat in this room. I normally don't like to take calls in this room, but I sat in this room with you, and tonight when I was like kind of pulling everything together, I was like, this was the most open room in the house, and so it's just fitting, I guess, I'm back here again. This seems to be the transmission spot.
I like it, and I like the lighting. You've got the red lights and the blue lights, and you know, it's kind of
I think it looks creepier than it actually is. Like in reality, it does. Like I'm looking at it on the screen, and I'm thinking, like, if I were to see this in someone else's, I'd be like, "What's really like creepy? What's going on back there?"
Seance or something?
Maybe it's a little seancey, but like it's not meant to be. I don't know, but like,
so
we're getting to that season, and this house I'm in is so friggin' haunted. And we won't even go down that path, but so, like it came about in the most like, serendipitous way that Jenny and I found this, and like there are all of these like indicate like the house is perfect, and there are all of these like gems that were like literal gems and figurative gems that came with us moving into this house. And a lot of it's like, you know, there's like this strange kind of like witchiness. Like there's this huge cauldron in the backyard. Like what's this cauldron doing back there? But the strangest thing, at least to most people who come and visit us, is that there is a closet. And this is like a 1950s Cape Cod. You know, it's not a big place, it's not particularly old, but there's a closet which, like most interior like doorknobs in a house are like an interior doorknob, and it's been outfitted with like the type of doorknob you would have on your front door, and it's locked. And so part of the lease, because we're leasing this place, is that you can't go into the closet. And it's like, I mean, both Jenny and I were like, all right, well, that makes sense. You know, I guess like both of us like can understand like the need of wanting to keep something kind of hidden. But like that's the nature, like that's the quality of this house. Is like, yeah, like the 90-year-old witchy lady who lived here has like a closet which you're not allowed into. And like, what's in it?
We stayed in an Airbnb like that one time that had like a room that like you're not supposed to go into, but it wasn't locked. It just had a sign on there, you know, that you're not supposed to go into. Of course, we took a peek.
Of course you can. Well, here's the funny thing: is the closet is in our bedroom.
Oh, that's
so cute. Yeah, exactly. Like we don't really. It's like a cape, so you got like these like these alcoves which you could go in, but like the main closet, yeah, we can't. That's like off limits, and it's never occurred to us. We're like, yeah, whatever, you know, we don't need that closet.
So that's really interesting because, you know, sometimes it's just people who own a house have a few things that they want to leave there, right? Kind of deal, like, you know, but I could make up a lot of stories about what could actually
be. There's an enormous basement. Like if there was something like like when you go down like the normal logical reason for like what would be put in there, like nothing makes sense. There's so much space in the basement where you could go and store anything. I believe her brother has a house, like they own like 3 houses in this neighborhood. There's all of these places to put it. So like there's something, there's so much, and this is the tip of the iceberg of the weirdness in the house. So I don't want to go too far down it, but it's a weird house. And so this, yeah, so like I began this by saying like, yo, it's not a creepy room. It's just naturally red in the background. And now I'm like, I'm going full circle. I'm like, okay, it's a creepy house. There's creepy things going on. This is the creepy room. So Halloween.
All right. I would just be curious to know if that clause in the lease existed before they met you, or if they added it after you toured the house. That would be my question, and then I could go on from there. All right. So I think we have a couple of things we really want to talk about today, but I think we were going to start first kind of by talking about traveling, and also about like not just, I mean, we're going to talk about traveling, but traveling during this particular time, which is, you know, like both necessary because we all are feeling very like, cabin fever or tired of being at home. We don't have our usual like ability to just be out and about 100% freely in the way that we were before. There's not, for someone like me, there's not like, I like to go out dancing and I like to go to bars and things like that. And that doesn't exist. And so you look for other ways to try and get out and do things. You know what I mean? So that makes people want to travel, but it's also very strange right now. So in some ways you're like, it's a little anxiety provoking, but I think there's people who are like interested in doing things now that maybe they wouldn't have been before because there were too many distractions. So it altogether makes for an interesting time. So what do you think?
I agree with you. I mean, it's like, and I struggle a little bit with the becoming complacent, because that's part of like, that's a powerful modus operandi in terms of introducing change to humanity. Is like, the boiling the frog, and it's like, it's just a little bit of this and like a little bit of a change, and then you get used to it because humans adapt to anything. So it's like, I don't want to get complacent. Yeah. And a lot of my favorite things of like just like normal life things are gone. There were like, I loved going to like where I live, it's Central Market. It's the oldest like continuous farmers market in the United States. And it's open 3 days a week. And I just love going there. Like, it's run by like, half the stands are Amish, and you see like all sorts of different people. And it's just like, and I did a whole bunch of videos. It's esoteric as can be. Like, this is all like the Mystic Lancaster series. Like, I'd recommend anyone if they're interested in it. Anyway, so they've killed that. It's horrible. I won't even go there anymore. And another part of it is travel. I've got a sister. She's getting married in a month, and I'm not going to go down to it. And I used to love airports. I love like, sitting in the middle, like once you've like gone through like the harassment of the TSA. And I can remember back before 9/11, as I'm certain you do too, like what it used to be like, to go into airports, but just like that excitement of like people running around and like you'd see all sorts. I don't know. I love the human element, but that's done. And right now, I don't want to go anywhere where anyone is going to have a reason to stick something up my nose. I'm not going to give them a reason, right?
Yeah.
I don't. And so it's like, that has been taken away. But then I have seen like this summer I did probably one big road trip, like 12 hours for one direction out, and went to some places I had not gone. And so that was definitely it kicked off the summer for me. And now ending, or I guess it'll probably be mid-fall, I found myself in another, where one door shuts, a window opens, and I'm not going to be going down and to my sister's wedding because I didn't want to fly. This other thing just kind of popped up. Someone who I guess who has for as long as I've been like kind of presenting information on the internet, like, this has been, I don't want to use the word fan, but it's like, someone who listens to my stuff and resonates with. And I've done I did some starboard sessions with her, and I developed like a nice relation, like a nice computer, internet relationship. Nothing particularly deep, but I guess if you do a starboard session, you do get to know someone. So her and her husband live like 4 or 5 hours from where me and Jenny are, and they're building what do they call those? The Cobb Earth House.
Yeah.
And their house looks like, not only that, but they've got like this renovated Airstream where, and they've invited us up. They're like, hey, why don't you come up and stay with us? And if you could help us with the building, that would be fantastic. And you could stay here. And like, these are the things which I'm beginning to see to show themselves, or at least what I'm embracing. And so it's maybe like if airline travel was still an option, or some of the old ways, like I would certainly continue down those paths. But I'm beginning to become much more open, like, to someone who I don't really know very well. I'm like, all right, let's go and see what happens, and seeing these relationships beginning to bubble up. I mean, me and you, I think, would be another example of like seeing a relationship which which has bubbled up through like maybe kind of being out there and like finding like-minded people and new connections are being made. And I think that now might be a time where it goes the next level. You know, you start to make it somewhat physical, where you get to meet people, and it's not just like, you know, through this artificial means.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Like, you and I met just a few weeks into this whole lockdown situation. If that hadn't have occurred, you and I may never have met each other. And this has grown into just our friendship, and this project has grown into something really interesting. And so in many ways, this has actually been a gift, as annoying as it is to have lost your farmer's market and whatnot. A similar thing is going on here. Well, while there are still farmers markets, like, I don't know if you've heard of the Santa Monica Farmers Market. It's probably the next most famous one to the one you're speaking about. But I mean, it's huge. It goes up, and they have everything. They have the most rare, weird kinds of fruits and vegetables you can imagine, flowers from all, like breeds that you've never heard of. You know, they'll come like they're from another planet. You know what I mean? They have freshly shucked oysters, fish just off the boat. You know, they have everything. You know, it's a thing that people who live in Santa Monica make, you know, like that's like a big coming together thing. And it's just not the same. It's very tiny now. You know what I mean? It's very tiny. There's just not as much stuff. It just isn't the same. So you're like me. I like to just go to like walk around and taste stuff, right? Like I'm kind of obsessed with food, or just look at what they got and whatnot, right? And yeah.
It's a building. It's at Lancaster's Central Market, and it's like they keep count of how many people go in, and like, you know, the dots where you're supposed to stand. And I think I got yelled at. That's what stopped. Like, I don't like to get yelled at. And like someone yelled at me for touching something.
Yeah.
That sounds.
To what you were saying about traveling, though, I mean, so I'm in a, you know, slightly different situation. I am flying somewhere this week. I mean, by the time the show comes out, I'll already be there and in the process of it. But you know, kind of, I had to think long and hard about it. You know what I mean? And you know, it's for Robert, who's my podcast host and my good friend. And I also, like, it feels like this is maybe the last window of opportunity for airline travel before there starts to be like immunity passports or mandatory vaccines or COVID testing at the gate, or, you know, those kinds of things. And then the ability to be able to spend a few days with, you know, about 80 other people who are also sort of trying to be outside of the system, and be able to, you know, in a very relaxed fashion, like compare ideas, you know what I mean? Share ideas, see what everybody's doing, make plans, you know, figure out, like, get actual physical directions to people's houses all over the country. So if we lose the ability to communicate through the computer, you know what I mean? We know where to find people, whether it be by snail mail, that may go too, or whether we just, you know, make an open agreement with some of these people who we really like that you're welcome anytime here. So, you know what I mean? Kind of thing. And, you know, some of that stuff. And, you know, yeah, so this is the first airplane trip I've taken in a year. And I don't see that I'm going to be taking one after this. And I agree with you. Like, when I was little, I loved to fly and go to the airport and all that kind of stuff. I've also had some of the most anomalous experiences of my life in airports. And then, you know, later, from like when I was really first digging into some of the like mind control and missing time kind of research and things like that, I did discover that like the airports are one of the major areas where some of the weird stuff happens.
They have to be. I mean, if you look like physically what is happening in airports, and you look and then like go a level deeper and say, like, what is this esoterically happening? What is metaphorically happening? What is all this sort of stuff? Like, airports are freaky places. Bus stops are bus stations are as well, but on a different level. They're a little bit more eighth house sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Astrological.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and now, I mean, I already didn't like traveling before all this. Going to the airport the last couple of years has just been highly unpleasant. You know, and so we were already kind of winding that sort of down anyway. But it'll be interesting. I think it'll be an interesting sort of observation of people kind of experience right now. And at any point, you know, like, I think to be able to do this at any point in the trip, I understand that if I'm asked to do something I don't want to do, I'm not doing it, even if that means I end up having to not do some portion, you know what I mean? If I end up having to not go, or if I end up having to drive back or something like that instead, then, that's just what it is. Like,
That's really, really smart to like have a game plan beforehand, like
yeah,
knowing what your line is, like that you're not going to cross, so that if you're put on the spot, like you've already gone through that mental checklist, and you know what your line is, and
yeah.
you're willing to accept the consequences for saying no, like whatever that may
Yeah, if
mean.
I lose my money, I don't care about losing my money. Like, I don't think money is real anyway. Like, it's
Yeah.
just, like we're playing Monopoly here. It's like a, like a wink, wink, nod, nod about the nonsense of things kind of thing. And so, yeah, like for me, the line is like, I'm willing to wear like the mask on the airplane or whatever. And I'm not willing to have a temperature taken here. I'm willing to have a temperature taken here, right? Because I've done the research sort of on this and this kind of thing, right? I'm willing, and that's it. I'm not willing to take any kind of test. I'm not willing to, none of that kind of stuff, right? Like, I'm not willing to wear masks when I sit at the table in the restaurant or any of that kind of stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of I'll leave a restaurant if they ask me to do that. Yeah, and that's just kind of it. Like, I'm the same things that I've been having to do here just to go to the grocery store and get food and do this and get whatever services, like that's what I'm willing to do, and really not more. And I'm not willing to make decisions based on money.
Is your entry airport like a tier 1 airport like LAX, or are you flying out of a regional or entering into the system on a regional level?
No, we're flying out of LAX.
Yeah. I found that though, that's always been my saving grace. Like where I'm living right now, the closest airport, which is like about 35 minutes from me, is a regional airport, but has an international airport. Harrisburg International and Baltimore and Philly are both about 90 minutes. To get into the system, and when I mean the system, I mean like the airport system, if you could do it on the regional level, it is such a better way.
Yeah.
Like I would much rather have to take a connection, but be able to enter in that way, because I did fly out of BWI last year, and that was before all of this stuff. And I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
It's just like, every year it's gotten worse and worse. And so it's, which I think also ties into like what you and I are playing with is like, well, as this one door is shutting, because we can see it shutting, like what are the windows that are going to be opening? And we're kind of looking at it like, we're not limiting that to per se, like a very like feet on the ground, 3-dimensional perspective for travel.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is going to probably be the last airplane trip. We have a road trip planned sort of later in the year, and we'll be getting there as quickly as we can. But on the way back, we're going to take some time and stop and visit people that I have met, either that I already know or that I have met through this sort of media stuff and whatever on the way back, and just kind of what you're doing this weekend, right? Take the opportunity to stop and meet people. But I also, and this is like really the underlying theme of the things that you and I are doing in these projects that we're working on and whatnot, are looking for ways to connect outside of space and outside of time. And I'm very hopeful that you and I will get to actually meet each other in the real physical world sometime in the near future. But until then, we're not waiting for that. We're starting to play with the with the portals around us, already, and that's fun and exciting too, because it's something I've always talked about and always believed to be possible and whatnot. But then now to finally like find someone who's actually really willing to play the game, and and some people are like, well, I tried to time travel and it didn't work. Like that's boring, right? Like we're starting with little steps and noticing the things that pop up, and sometimes it's a symbol or a synchronicity, and sometimes it's actual a real physical thing manifests itself, and that's really cool.
So why don't we continue down this story?
All right. So we had an interesting thing happen this week. I was on the way home from work, and Michael and I were having a conversation about a couple of things, and I was relaying to him a dream that Laura had that was very unusual and had a lot of interesting markers and a lot of symbolic kinds of things in it and whatnot. And we were having a conversation for a bit, and and some of this is, we've been working on ways to connect during the dream space and sending each other messages outside of time and stuff. And some of this seemed to come through in Laura's dream, which was kind of interesting. So we were talking about it, and it led into some other interesting conversations that maybe we'll get into some stuff related to in the second hour. But we had this conversation that went all over the place. And then when we got off the phone, I'm sitting on the couch and Laura looks outside and she's like, is that a pink flower over there? And I was like, where? And I'm looking over to, like, we have some cactuses in one part of the yard that sometimes sprout a little pink flowers. So I'm looking over there. I'm like, yeah, but those are always there. I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, no, over there by the lemon tree in the back. I'm like, we don't have a lemon tree back there. She's like, well, it's some kind of citrusy thing. So I look over and they're just in the middle of the dirt where there's nothing else around. There's like one pink flower on a stem that is like a foot tall in the middle of dirt, like nothing else around there. A few 4 or 5 feet away from a citrus tree that is not producing much of anything, right? And so I was like, that's weird. So we go over and we look at it, and it's bizarre. It's just like in the middle of like arid dirt. So I take a picture and I send it to Michael, and he just gets back to me and says, I don't know what you call it out there, but in Pennsylvania, we call that a good sign. And I just laughed and, whatever. And then I sent the picture also to my friend, Chris Crimmy, who I do a lot of shows with. She's really into gardening and flowers and horticulture and all that stuff. And I asked her, I was like, this is weird. Is it possible that a flower could just appear overnight? Like, it literally was not there the day before, right? I had been out back there the day before to that area and not seen it. And Laura had been out that morning and not seen it. So is this possible that something could appear like just in one day and be a foot tall and with a full flower on it? And though unusual, she said it is possible with the particular kind of flower that it is. And our flower, she said, is a type of amaryllis, right? And so that was interesting. And then the next morning, you and I were back and forthing about something else. And you said, you told me that you told Jenny about my flower, and she
right. So I relayed the story, and I forget how. Like, it was like kind of in passing. I was like, oh yeah, because we've all we've developed a relationship. Me, you, Jenny, and Laura, and we kind of know each other. So I tell the story to Jenny, and about how you had this flower, and what stuck in my mind and the way I relayed the story was that it appeared in a place where there weren't any other flowers. Like, that was kind of like the way which I framed it up to Jenny. And like, she kind of like stops and she looks at me. She's like, what? And I thought it was purple, like it looked more, at least the picture you sent to me, it looked kind of purplish, but I'm a little bit colorblind. So maybe my colors are, literally, because Jenny said the exact same thing happened in our front yard. We had like a place where there's literally it's like a dirt patch, a large dirt patch. It was recently just like all of the weeds were pulled up. Like, so it was like everything was pulled up and was just dirt. And then out of this entire like 10 foot by 20 foot dirt patch was a lone purple flower, which just popped up out of nowhere. And it happened on the same day. And so we set like this intention, like, we don't know what, but we're trying, you and I, had set this intention that we're trying to create a tunnel of some sort, quote unquote tunnel, some sort of like physical connection across the, across this space, and we're not knowing what we're going to look for. And you're absolutely right. I forgot I wrote that to you, and I was just being kind of like, just being silly when I said that, but I wasn't. Like, that's a good sign. Like, yeah, we're like, if you think of like what is going to be the first indication, I'm not saying with 100% certainty that these are connected, but if this is what we're playing, and we're actively looking for indications of ways of making connections across time space, like matching flowers with appearing in places they should not be appearing at the same time, like I'll go back to that original quote, like that I would say would be a good sign.
Yeah, so you said the good sign before you knew about Jenny's flower, and then what was super interesting, ours is kind of like a magenta-ish pink, yours is slightly more purple, right? But after I discovered yours, I called Chris again, right? And she identifies your flower as one that's slightly different, but of a similar kind of thing. And it would be the kind of flower I have wouldn't grow where you live because it wouldn't survive the fall or the winter because of the weather, right? But she said what's interesting is that the flowers have the same projective geometry. She used exactly that word. And earlier, I'm sure you can find in an earlier episode, we did talk about like the possibility of like, you know, me sort of being able to transport myself, right? And you being ready to receive me sort of in your yard somewhere, a connection between our yards.
Right, right.
About opening up, you know, doorways with sound and biogeometry and this kind of stuff. And I think we even used the term the geometry of manifestation. So she said projective geometry. And when you're dealing with portals and passageways from between levels and realms and things, it is geometric in nature, those sort of spaces, right? So when we get a flower with the same sort of projective geometry, right? I was like, wow, that's really like, that's cool. That's like a very interesting
You're absolutely, the shapes were very similar. And I would, and to me, the colors were very similar. They were like, they were more similar than less similar.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like yellow and blue.
Right.
It's like purple and magenta, as you said. And the shapes of them, the way they present themselves. And so, you know, we've been so, trained in our thinking that we think of like, you know, everything in the scientific genus sort of like, you know, this is this category, but that's just one way of, and it certainly a fine way of categorizing things. And like, you know, there's a value to categorizing things, but like categorizing things based upon their shape is just as valid. Yeah. You know, so like, you know, by looking at that, they are the same thing. And I forgot about this. This is interesting. So, I went through a period like maybe about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, where my dream life was like my dream recall and the caliber of the vividness in my dreams was very, very high. And in the last couple weeks, that's dissipated. Like it's harder for me to remember my dreams if I'm remembering them at all. It seems like Jenny's dreams have picked up. But what she said, and I don't recall, and maybe like during the break, I'm going to go ask her. I forgot to tell you this. So she had a dream, and this was after we had the flower experience. So it's not like this is coming out of the cold, but there was a character in her dream. What was the name of your flower?
An amaryllis.
Yeah, say it again.
Amaryllis.
Yes, that was the name of the character in her dream. She was like, I did care like so-and-so, and she introduced herself as, and I'm not gonna be able to pronounce it, so I'm not gonna repeat it. But that word, for whatever reason, for whatever dreams are, like that's what that presented as a character within her dream. So, you know, we're seeing multiple layers of like reality. I'll go find out. I'll see if she remembers exactly what that dream was about or who that character was. But yeah, we got that going on too.
Oh, that's interesting. And I also want to say, I didn't know what we were going to talk about today. So I like kind of pre-associated a few things just to have stuff to talk about. And in a show later, another time, what we're going to dig into this symbol that I just see everywhere, you know, so I can get his perspective on it, but the symbol is the quatrefoil. So I looked up variations on the quatrefoil. Like I literally typed in variations, four-lobe shape is another way of saying it, right? And I'm going to show you, it's just funny that this comes up, right? So, okay. All right, so I'm going to show you what came up when I looked four-lobe shapes up, right? Look at the flower.
There's the flower.
It looks like the flower, right? And those aren't four-lobe shapes. So why is it in the four-lobe shape department? None of the flowers that are shown here have four lobes. They all have like at least five, right? And so like there's 4 lobe shapes shown like this, like variations on the quatrefoil. Here's a more technological one that I'd like to actually get into with you sometime. But why are those pink? Those are, so basically Michael's flower is kind of like this color more, and ours is a little more pink, right? But those flowers are there. And I have not typed in anything about those flowers on the computer. I've only talked to you and Chris about it.
So I like, this is becoming a trend in how we're doing these shows. Like, you know, you show the search results visually, and there's all sorts of cool stuff in there, because there's also the white blood cells. And that
Right.
was part of our conversation, was all about the blood.
Yeah, we had a conversation about blood. And actually, now as I look at this one. This one's interesting. This shapes of atomic orbitals. What does that mean? Right? Okay, so let's see if I can put that on the center part here. Look at this. So it's variations on the 4 lobe shape, and then there's like a disc with a hole through the middle.
Yeah,
like a black hole or an accretion disk, or like a traveling through of something, right? An atomic orbital. And they have a 4-leaf clover shape, which is, I told you about that guy, Victor, I interviewed, where he sees the clovers everywhere, right? When he's doing his research, he keeps bumping up against the clover.
We need to have this guy on.
This guy here at the hair?
Yes.
Right? So just when we're on there, this is interesting. Oh, look at this, like almost like a target, right? We're trying to like zoom in on something with the travel or the passing through from place to place. Look at this.
So the quantum mechanics of the atoms. So like now we're working with, like, you know, the nature of reality, right?
Look at some of the nature of light. We've talked about some of that, atomic spectroscopy and the Bohr model. Bohr, I think, is in that synchronicity book I'm reading. The wave nature of matter. So we're talking about particles to waves, with some of this being able to travel and reassemble ourselves. Quantum mechanics in the atom, the shape of atomic orbitals. So it looks like they have a group.
Just click on it. I just want to see. I just want to see who these folks are. I always like to look and see who everyone is.
It's just names.
All right. I see one MW.
Yep, Matt. Yep. No EM, just an MW.
EB.
Yeah, but you know, so let's go back. There's just so many interesting things on the page, right? Like this one was particularly interesting to me because this is like, so I was looking into all sorts of variations of this quatrefoil. Look what this is. What is this? I don't even, it's some kind of gaming device, right? But this would be like a very technological version of it. But the thing that goes along always with this 4-lobe shape to me is the prism color, all the colors of the spectrum. When I'm looking at the 4-lobe shape in like my visual space, you know, when I'm dancing or if I'm have a psychedelic experience, right? But there's always this 4 lobes, and then here's this sort of 5th spot in the middle that we've been starting to, like maybe that's the black hole or the entrance point or something, right? The 5th element maybe, right? That I've been starting to identify with this. And this is like a super, this is called a quad stellar 4-lobe chassis. Look at these. I'm not even sure what this is, but certainly some high-tech looking customizable RGB lighting system to create a gamer's exclusive gaming atmosphere. So I guess we could be considered gamers. We're playing a game here, right? Sonia Barrett would like that. She sees everything that way. Talking about alchemy, cryo rig, right? These are interesting, just little terms that come up when you.
Certainly.
This one says, be quiet, introduces the dark bass.
It definitely has, like, I mean, just the way of the design elements of it is certainly of a you know, some sort of like, what was it? The Lord of the Rings, the bad guy, Sauron, the Eye of Sauron. Like it's got like that element you see in all of these videos, like, you know, the Saturnian sort of like cube of Saturn feel to it. It certainly doesn't make me feel all warm and fuzzy inside like those flowers did.
Not that one, right? But it's interesting. But it has the same
because it's like we're still playing with the same like different expressions of the same like primordial sort of expression, which I think is what that shape which you initially searched upon was
Yeah.
the whether we call it the clover or anything else.
Yeah, so I think we'll take a deep dive on that shape because I'm just starting to find all sorts of interesting things sort of related to that. And when searching for variations upon the same idea, you know what I mean? So I think that's a separate episode of its own. But this flower thing I thought was super cool, and just really sort of meaningful in these exercises, of connection that we've been working on here. We've, a lot of our awarenesses about synchronicities and things like that have had to do with, natural elements and whatnot. So I think it was kind of a cool way for it to sort of show up,
So definitely. And can I share with you another kind of like out there thing which happened today?
Yeah.
All right. So
I love these.
I've always walked this like balance in my life. I've walked this balancing act between like the edge of and I'll say like mainstream reality and just like totally nuts out there. It's like I'm a pretty normal guy in a lot of ways, and so I ground most of the things which I'm drawn to in like something which is at least tangible from I've been indoctrinated into a mainstream sort of way of looking at reality. So I'm like, okay, I can go really far out there, but if I can ground it in something which feels or which seems three-dimensionally real, well, then I'm okay with that. So that's just kind of like how I am. And I think like that is a really nice approach into going to like the really weird stuff, because you could just go like really weird. And like, if you don't have any sort of grounding, like, it's just stardust, it floats away. So I've always been drawn to like, the mineral kingdom. I always have like, I've always been like kind of like a rock hound, I suppose, like however you want to call it. So this here is one of my bags.
I love your bags. I have one. I love your bag.
I don't know if I ever showed you this one. This is like one of the first ones I made. This is my favorite one. So I've had in this bag, yes, I have. I've shown you this one before. So this is my primary one. I carry it with me. There are 3 stones in there, and I don't really do anything with them. Like, I know a lot of people are like crystal healers and like who like grid work and stuff like that. And I get that. And I think it's very, intriguing, but that's never spoken to me. But I do like to have, I'm not going to lie, I carry crystals with me all the time. I like to have them. And I don't really I don't take it past that line. I'm like, I like it. I know for almost like an emotional / psychological reason, I like to have them around. So here's my primary stone. This was a gift to me. It's a herkimer diamond. It's found like right at the source of the Susquehanna River. I went on a trip up to that part of the world years ago, and it was given to me at the Airbnb where I stayed. And so I like the stone. I carry it with me. So I'm aware, like, even though I might not necessarily practice, like, I know a whole lot about, like, metaphysical uses of crystals and how people use crystals and program crystals, but I've never actually, like, I don't practice that, but in the last week, I've just had this kind of like itch or urge. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I want to go from just like ideas to practice.
Yeah.
All right. And like, I like carrying around these, like I carry around like it's like a medicine bag. I know a lot of people who wear medicine bags. Like, that's just not really my thing, but I guess this would be my medicine bag because I carry it around like in my backpack. I always have a backpack, and like, I like bags. Like, I'm as sag as they come. Sag love bags. And so I got bags. And so I just carry it without a purpose. I'm like, I now want to have a purpose. And what's always intrigued me was like this idea of like the reason why you would carry a crystal, or one of the reasons is like, besides like, let's say just like a normal metaphysical reason, is that crystals can be programmed. And I've always been really into like knowing about a metaphysical quality of crystals and looking at it from a very like tangible purpose. Like crystals do something, whether it was like how crystals were used for clocks, or like how they're used for cutting edge technology, particularly like surgical instrumentation and like gyroscopes, and like how, and then like, the precision of what makes a crystalline substance different than a non-crystallized substance, of the geometry of the molecules. I've always gotten into that, but I've never actually applied it. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to program these. This is something, and I'm going to program. I never knew, I always knew that like that was a theory that they could be programmed, and I liked it. And I thought about like, I'm carrying these around, like it's like carrying around a laptop, and like, oh, I got my laptop, but you don't ever like do anything with it. You're just carrying around a computer. And like, this is my computer. And like, and I've done this for 15 years. I've been like this. And I've always been aware, but I've never had the impetus within me to cross that line. And maybe it's because of everything that's going on right now. Maybe it's because of the flower. Maybe it's because of something else. I don't know. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go, and these 3 crystals, I thought a lot about it the last couple of days. I'm like, and I like the idea. I read my son's like a whole series of books. It was called the Inheritance series, and it was like a fantasy book, and they used crystals, and like the crystals did something for the characters. So I'm like, I'm going to program it like the books, like they did in the books. I'm going to program these crystals. And I spent a lot of time in the last week, like a couple of days, thinking about like, well, what would I program? If I've waited this long to program, like I want to do something good. So I'm like, I'm a programmer. So I finally go, I thought all about it, and I got a notebook. Like, I'm a notebook geek. I like to carry notebooks. I like to write things down in my notebooks. I feel really, really like that's my favorite thing. So I write down in my notebook, like, this is what I'm going to do. And today, when I'm in my shack, because that's what it is. I'm in my shack. I'm doing my job at my shack. And I'm like, I'm going to program these crystals. And I've got like all of these books. I've got more books on crystals than you can imagine. I'm reading some of them about like how to program crystals. And I'm reading all these different things. I'm like, that makes sense to me. That doesn't. I come up with something that makes sense to me. And I go through this process of like what I would do to program the crystal. And I'm doing that. And, I'm doing this in the shack, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, whenever I do stuff like this, I always kind of like, this part of me that like kind of like, I take it very seriously, but I take it not seriously at all. And I'm standing there, and what my shack is, it's really just like a shed, like a big shed. And people come up and I check their IDs before they drop off their woody waste. And I'm standing there, and it's about 5 o'clock, and the sun is starting to set, and it's going through some trees, and the lights diffuse in this really, really interesting way. And I'm right by a stream, and, I'm kind of taking it in. And I look down at this crystal, and I've had this crystal for years. I've held this crystal 1,000 times. I've looked at it 1,000 times. And I don't know if I've never seen this before or if it just appeared. But if you know anything about crystals, particularly like quartz or like crystals, like sometimes like if you hold the light in a certain way, you could get like a translucence quality. It kind of has a rainbow-esque. Like
I love it. Yeah.
Like the Labradorite, which I sent to you.
Yeah.
And suddenly this crystal starts glowing. With this, like, it's not just me, like I'm showing it to other people, like this crystal I've never seen before, which I've had for years.
Yeah.
And it starts having this luminescent quality, which it's never had, no more than like 30 minutes after I program it.
Wow.
But I don't know if this is just like, me seeing things. I don't know. I never noticed it before. But all I know is this is 2 times in 2 weeks that we're seeing some very, very like, I'll be the first to admit, like it's borderline. I'm not saying anything definitely happened, but if something happened, this is what it's going to look like.
Well, even if the only thing that happens is that you're able to see something you couldn't see before, even if it was there the whole time and you couldn't notice it. Like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes when your relationship to something or someone changes, suddenly you see something in them or that you couldn't see before, right? And you kind of, made a different use or connection with this crystal than you had. But this is all super interesting, okay? So I'll tell you this, you're about 5 weeks in, or 5 weeks or 6 weeks into the not eating sugar, right? Something like that, okay. So I'm helping Michael with some diet stuff, and he wanted to get off of sugar. So when I first got off of sugar, it was at about 6 weeks in that I started having some of these same kinds of things happen. Well, first of all, it wouldn't surprise me that you'd think, let's try programming the crystal based on the success we've had with the flower and some of the dream connections that like this metaphysical world is open to us, right? Like, so it seems like a next logical thing to want to do. But it's when I started to have, it was during that period of time, I started having some of my first interactions with crystals. And one of the things that happened is I was at this party on an Indian reservation down in La Jolla, okay? And there's no cell phone reception out there or anything like that. It's sacred ground, right? So you're not having all these interfering signals and frequencies and whatnot. And, you know, I've told aspects of this story many times before, so I'm not going to go really into it. But basically, I was dancing. It was an outdoor party, and in the stage, like on the near the DJ stage, there was a table that had an enormous crystal about this big on it, right? And it was on one of those things like I showed you that I have, like that crystal spinner that has like lights underneath it that lights up the crystal, so it looks like a light show, but with a natural element instead of a disco ball, right? Kind of thing. So I'm dancing sort of about 8 or 12 feet from where this table with this large crystal is. And I'm starting to recognize that I'm moving into that space where I'm kind of blipping in and out of reality. And I'm in touch with something that is, you know, some kind of maybe vortex that's on this land, because I'm having this sort of Edward Snowden reveal of the DNA about information. And one of the things I started trying to do when you start to realize you're in that plastic space where you can play with reality, I was like, all right, so the crystal is spinning, and every time the crystal spins, it goes in the same order of the colors, right? Like pink, yellow, green, blue, purple, and then back around, right? I was like, I'm going to start playing with it and seeing if I can get the crystal to move, like to move the other way, or to get the colors to go out of order, or different things like that. And I just fully focused my attention on the crystal and on shifting the order of things, and right. And then I got it to start going backwards and whatnot. I'm like, this is cool. And I felt like this really only works. This would work with like an AI kind of technology or something natural like a crystal. It wouldn't really work with a disco ball or something like that, right? So I was really enjoying like just having this back and forth with the crystal. And this was like, my friend told me, like, she's like, where were you? She's like, I couldn't find you, and then I found you. And it was like weird. Your face was like phasing in and out of reality. Like you'd be there for a second and then you were gone, and you know? And so I think in those moments where you're like in that full connection, you're phased out of reality. You know what I mean? And then you're kind of back in and whatnot. And, you know, so I think some of this was happening during this period of time. And during that period of time also, my mentor had somebody who was really into this programming crystals, sort of saw certain crystals, particularly like really perfect quartz and herkimer diamonds, as being something that harkened to something they had in Atlantis, like they called force diamonds, right? And that needed to be keyed to the user. And so she keyed one crystal that I had to me with this like ancient language. And the key for me was something like Fe Miat Ru. So this person channeled an entity that she called the Faerns, which seemed to match up pretty close to what a lot of people refer to as the Fae, right? But I was going through some of this developing relationships with crystals in a way I hadn't, even though I'd always liked them and had them in my house and stuff like that. I was starting to really play with them more, right? I started sleeping with them in my bed. I started doing different stuff. But it was also the time that I started really beginning to unravel some of like the mind control stuff, because the sugar was out of my system. Right? Sugar was out. I'm starting to have memories of things, not only that happened, but of things that I'm able to do, right? Like skills, abilities, different kinds of things, you know, and then, you know, that process just started continuing for me. But that's when it was during those first several weeks of being off of sugar. A lot of this stuff were steps on the path to the whole thing with me and the series that I developed about sugar as programmable matter. Right. And so this can lead us maybe into the next thing we were going to talk about, which was food. Right. But sugar also has a lot of the same qualities as a crystal. And so it became a very handy thing to be used by forces that should or shouldn't be, whatever, you know, right, to program people. Right. And it has, you know, it's cubic, it's crystalline, it can hold information, you know, it's able to, you know, do all this kind of stuff. I think, you know, lots of different elements that we consume. Water, obviously, we're familiar with Emoto's experiments, can be programmed. I actually think salt would be an interesting thing to play with. And I just had an idea while we were here talking about like one way we could play with, you know, programming our food through the use of like have you seen those large Himalayan salt planks? right? But they have ones that are for chefs, and you can keep them in the kitchen, and they're naturally hypoallergenic. You just use them. You don't have to do anything with them to keep them clean because it's salt. It is clean. But like in restaurants, they'll cure fish on them. They'll cure meat on them. You can just lay the piece of meat on there for a bit and then turn it over, and then it's like salting your steak before you cook it, right? But because it's this big solid crystal, we could probably imbue intention or idea or thoughts or whatever into it, and then have all of our food for a period of time touch that intention. But yeah, so there's lots of stuff that can be done with this programming of crystals. And one of that what you're talking about, that rainbow, that like sort of prismatic effect that's in them, oftentimes they're in crystals that have windows in them. Have you, right? Like, you know, and I got into this, what is the meaning of a window in a crystal when I was doing the Sugar as Programmable Matter series. And it was also how I had kind of figured out that Bill Gates was going to use Windows to upload an operating system into our body through sugar, and those new mRNA vaccines the needles are made of sugar, right? So literally sugar has windows in it, and the windows are not the kind like in crystals like we think of it. The windows are like the operating system in Microsoft, and they have literally created technology based on the crystals that you're talking about. So yes, you're 100% right. That's the original laptop. You can probably do just about anything with that you can do with your laptop. You just have to be a more skilled and intentional user.
So I, for this one here, was to constantly pulling in energy and allowing mind to focus to, so we can burrow more tunnels through the time-space continuum.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so that's that, and I think you're right. When you say, as soon as you said the thing about like 5 weeks in without sugar, that made perfect sense, because how I would describe my relationship with a lot of like, as I said before, like, you know, grounded in mainstream indoctrination, you know, like let me make it something tangible, you know, at least that's how I positioned it in terms of you know, like that sounds like, you know, the best foot forward, like, you know, I'm putting it in the best possible terms. But the truth of the matter is, it's like, you know, I'm trying, whether it's accurate description or not, I'm trying to force something into a specific worldview. And that worldview is definitely part of the culture of feeding all of us sugar at all times.
Yeah.
And I've always had like this line, like that's been my demarcation. Like I got to go and fit it into this sort of space, even though I've never been held myself entirely to that. But there's something which I would stop. You know, I'd still, you know, carry crystals with me. I knew all this sort of stuff. I knew what to do, but there was something that was stopping me. There was and it didn't feel like there was something that was stopping me. It just felt like this. It was like, I just don't want to do it. I'm fine just having this. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. That's just not like I'm not interested in doing that, but something had changed. Yeah. And that is the most drastic thing that's changed. And I've been wanting to be off sugar for 20 years. Yeah. Like I've always known that. I've just never like actually done it. It's never like, now's the time to do it. At least for me, at least, you know, and you're absolutely right to see these other sort of connections. So I'm curious to see where else and how else to see new places I can go.
Yeah. The other thing that I discovered besides these awarenesses, one of the things that started to happen to me at about the same point is I was finally able to sort of see things through, right, to complete things that I started. So for you, you had this process of having developed a relationship with these crystals, right? You've done all this stuff, but you didn't do the complete thing, which is like, you know, beginning to make use of it in a way that, like, you know,
it's tangible.
Is tangible, right? So that's the other thing. That's one of the biggest things that, like, sugar and drugs and all those things, because the sugar is the crystal methamphetamine and all that kind of stuff. It's got all the same kind of chemical makeup as sugar. That's kind of how I figured some of the stuff out, right? Like, no one ever finishes shit. Have you ever seen like a tweaker's garage? They've taken everything apart and now not put it back together because they're going to fix their car, they're going to fix their clock, they're going to do all this kind of shit, right? They have start all these projects, but they never finish them, right? Kids on sugar, they start their painting, they don't finish it. You know, it's the same. It's a very interesting thing. We have all this stuff going on, and some of it is because we literally like lose the moment. We lose the so I'm going to send you this article about lily waves and what they do to the water and the sugar in our body. And lily waves are part of what goes along with a lot of the projects and mind control kind of stuff. The same Lily that created the anechoic chambers and did this television show Flipper, he's all over the mind control stuff, right? John Lilly. But basically, like when some of these frequencies explode these sugar molecules in our bodies that have been storing information to that point, it almost creates like a malaise. Like you can't actually remember the event. So the event or the project or the process is almost recorded on the sugar, and then it's exploded by sort of being exposed to some of these frequencies that we're exposed to. And it's almost like, you know, like when you can't remember something, right? Like we live in this, like I wonder people who lived before we had frequency soup, right? Because it's just ever increasing. It's, you know, since the electronic ages have come about, if they had such trouble with memory as some people do now, I don't think so, because most of their stories were passed by word of mouth. Right? So that's one of the things, and it's very convenient for when you're doing things with people outside of their front level awareness, making it difficult to remember based on, you know, the blood sugar, right? It's a very devious, sneaky tool, right, to sort of use. But now that we know that, there's lots of interesting things we can do with that awareness, and that's really cool that you're having that experience. So it almost makes me feel like it's like a rite of passage when you get to a certain point with the sugar.
The rite of passage being like specifically with crystals, or just like finishing something that you started beforehand? Or the rite of passage, like if in this, I mean, I think the rite of passage is getting off sugar.
Right. But then there's this thing that happens, like usually when like young men go through a rite of passage or some sort of like a tribal ritual or shamanic kind of journey or whatever, right? Like they go through this experience, and then there's like almost sort of like a reward or something that gets to happen after that. They get to maybe have a different thing that they do, a different responsibility, or they get access to something or whatnot. And you kind of pass through this thing, and now you get access to the real programmable crystal. Like you're not
right.
The fake stupid one anymore, which is you know, that's controlling you. You're not being controlled by the fake stupid crystals. You're being now, like, you know, given back access to your own sort of natural resonance with these amazing natural things.
Right. I mean, that is that's happening in real time right now, and this is my unique way. I think it's happening, like where it's showing up for me. I don't think I'm the only one, but I think that's what this time is about, like, or this opportunity, like when how we began this episode talking about, like, you know, the travel and the you know, that changing because of the airlines, but then it's creating maybe something else, a different sort of travel experience. And so, like, there's all of this newness which is coming in, but diet is like our, you know, that's one of the foundational things of being human. I think travel is also, but diet even more so. And our diet is so is built on sugar. And unless you give that up, like, I mean, like everything has to, like, I mean, no one, it's not fun when anyone tells you got to give something up that you don't want, if you're not ready to give up. You know, I don't want to be that person, but I think it's quite evident when, you know, when both you and I know from personal experience, and when you look at what we know is going on in the world right now, and how things work in the hidden level, like, you know, whether it's lily waves and sugar or all the other sort of mind control stuff, it's like, you got to get off it.
Yeah, you got to get off it, and also develop that awareness. Like, you know, I spent a good long time not consuming any sugar at all ever, right? And then I've gone, you know, through phases where I'm having it occasionally, and if, you know, traveling a little more, and sometimes then having that experience of like not being quite as clean really shows you that difference, right? And I was talking about this with Shane the other day. My friend Shane, we recorded a show about meat, sugar, and mind control. And like we were talking about, like the differences we notice when we go through periods of time where the diet is very clean, and then other times where it's like sometimes you get tired of just eating the same thing over and over, especially if you've been on the carnivore diet for a significant amount of time, and it gets to a place where like you have to take a break for a little bit just to be able to recommit to, you know, whatever process you're doing, and it becomes very obvious. You know what I mean? And so sometimes, you know, that's an interesting experience to have too. But, you know, I think it's something, I don't expect everybody to, you know, be as interested in it as I am, or to live their whole life without sugar. I haven't lived mine without, you know, necessarily, but I do recommend that just to become completely aware of another state of consciousness, experiment with it. Just like you experimented with acid or marijuana or whatever kinds of, or meditation or yoga, this is another kind of shift of your consciousness that is interesting to experience.
I'm more extreme than you. I think everyone needs to get off sugar. I think if you don't get off sugar, like that's going to be a barrier. I think that like that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, it's the nature of the reality we're living in, and it's so tied to consciousness. Like, you know, you can't really separate. They're one and the same. And I've been going into this a lot deeper in like some of my in my own, like, you know, individual presentations on my channel, but like we're in what I'm calling like fourth dimensional consciousness, you know, and there's it's inversion and dominant oriented by nature, dominance oriented. And there's a lockdown, which is happening right now. Like, this is me not just saying it. I'm like, just go look around. And this is, and I go and I say, like, we've been in fourth dimensional consciousness ever since agriculture began.
Yep.
You know, it's like that's one and the same. There's certain levels within it, but as soon as it became agriculture, and I'm listening to all of these like different podcasts or different people, I'm like, they got like some really, really good pieces of the puzzle, but I'm like, you're not going far enough, because you're still in the same friggin' system. You're still in the same sort of mentality. And if you really want to get out, and you really want, like, this is the technology, and you're able to do all this stuff, you can't still be like, well, I still like to do a couple lines of coke, you know, I just do a couple I'll just do one bump in the morning, and then like I'll be told no.
Yeah, no,
it's like, and that's why you have to understand like the nature of being human, and like, you know, our complacency, and like, you know, and like we can justify so many things, but like we're beginning to see, like, you know, what some of the worst things are for our experience, particularly if you recognize that living in a system which is out of harmony with reality. I mean, I call it 3D and 5D are the two different octaves of a consciousness in harmony with reality. 3D being like what we think of like hunter-gatherer, and 5D just being a higher octave of it, but they're both in harmony. And what we're in right now, there's no harmony. As soon as you do agriculture, you're out of harmony. You're beginning to dominate.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And what you're saying about this time, I mean, we're already feeling it. Like, we're like, when we get back from this traveling, we're back, you know what I mean? Because we sometimes, you know, you travel a lot, you get a little sloppy, but we're wanting to sort of experience that absolutely no sugar, no alcohol kind of thing that I haven't experienced in a little while, just because I, you know, like mostly I do it, but sometimes I don't. And it'll be interesting to get back to that place that I was for a long period of time, or maybe a different place. It's going to be a different experience. It's different every time. But no, there is something about this time that, you know, calls for that for sure.
You don't have an option. Like 20 years ago, you had an option. You could go down this path and you'd be like, I'm going to go and live on a mountain in India, and I could go, or you could go and like, yeah, I'm going to go and have 10 million in my 401k. Guess what? Your 401k don't mean nothing no more.
Yeah.
It's money, like we said in the beginning, it's all monopoly money. And they're changing the monopoly game. And so it's like all of the stuff, all of the good citizens in the past who played the game the way they're supposed to, they're, you know, you're going to wake up and you realize like, well, what, you changed the game on me? It's like, you don't have a choice. You can't continue to play that. Like and that's the beauty of like, when they say like, you had that during times of like immense, like, you know, if you want to call it like the apocalypse, for that's what it is. It's the end of an age, are an opportunity for great spiritual growth. The reason is because you don't have a chance. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And it's like right there in front of you, because you could always do great spiritual growth, but you have to go and drive that inside. But now you don't have a choice. By looking at all of the changes, the game is changing. The rules of the game are changing right now. You could go along with the rule. I don't know how the reality works, but I know that if you want to get out of it, you have to distract. You have to pull away from the primary ways which you are via consciousness tapped into it. And I think sugar is definitely it. And addiction, it's all addiction. And I think if you go and you look at what they tell us, all addiction begins with it's the stimulation of our pleasure centers. Yep. And it's through the introduction of sugar. Sugar wasn't around before the agricultural age. Like, none of the fruits that we knew, none of that stuff were eaten. We didn't have that sugar. And we've had such refined sugars now. So when it hits the central nervous system and the endocrine system of a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, guess what? It's like giving them crack. But we're all like, sugar's like, it's not that big of a deal. And so, but you're literally, we've all had put inside us. We've been conditioned to become addicts just through the introduction of sugar at this young age. It's like the same thing they did in MK Ultra. If they sexualize you at age 3, you become either hypersexual or hyposexual. It's like when you go and you stimulate these highly, what we respond to pleasure centers, we the rest of our lives, if we are impacted by it.
Yeah. So that actually sounds like you read 2 of the books I recommended to you, right? So in the book Sugar Blues, it talks about, there's a lot of interesting things in there, but it talks about how the rise and fall of civilizations, how those were connected to the introduction and then the expansion of the availability of sugar in different societies, right? Like that's, if you could trace it, that corruption generally, when sugar comes in, only the elite can afford it, right? And it starts to develop a level of corruption, and then all of a sudden they, basically push it off as one of the major food sources on the poor, on the, the slave class. And it's the same cycle over and over. Another thing in that book is that most people have what's called saccharine disease. About 50% of people have what's called saccharine or low blood sugar disease, which then what happens is when they eat sugar, then their blood sugar goes up really fast, but then very quickly drops down really, really low. And that keeps them in that cycle of looking to come back up to even, right? And it can be even with someone who doesn't consume a lot of sugar. That's how weird it is for some people's body makeup. Some people have a better tolerance for it, but they've actually found that most people who are alcoholics even, it's a form of low blood sugar. They're almost more addicted to the sugar and the alcohol than the actual being drunk. So there's that. And then what you were saying about the pleasure centers, there's this other guy. So the Sugar Blues book is by William Duffy. And there's another book about sugar called Hacking of the American Minds. And it talks about how much sugar contributed to us being willing to replace true happiness or true contentment with pleasure. We've gotten the things confused, right? And it speaks to that in relationship to addiction. Now, are you ready for me to really blow your mind?
Blow my mind. I'm ready.
So what you were saying about we don't have that option anymore, like it used to be, you could go to the top of a mountain in India or whatever, you could go just out in the woods and avoid it. Well, with the introduction of 5G, which they claim they want to have everywhere, beaming from everything, there's not going to be any area that doesn't have 5G internet or whatever, right? Well, I originally had this theory because I see everything is coded and they put it right in front of your face, that you're going to be susceptible to 5G if you have more than 5 grams of sugar in your blood at a time. To me in my head, that made sense. And I think I even said that in an interview with Michael Joseph or in one of my Sugar is Programmable Matter videos. And then a period of months later, I was reading a book when I was in school, and the natural resting, you're never going to guess what the natural resting, if you haven't consumed any additional sugar, right? Everything has sugar, even celery has a little bit and whatnot, right? Even, everything has some except for meat generally, right? Guess what the person's natural resting blood sugar is if they haven't consumed any additional thing with any kind of sugar.
What is that, 5 grams? Is that
5 grams. 5 grams. Like the person's natural resting space if they haven't introduced sugar into their blood. I'm like, this is fucking, like, you know what I mean? And so to me, like, I see one of the main tools for avoiding issues related to 5G is not eating sugar, right? And I, you know, like, I know a lot of people who claim that they have a lot of issues with 5G. They feel very sensitive to it and whatever. I mostly feel okay. I eat little to no sugar most of the time. You know what I mean? And so I think that there really is a connection, and you know, and yeah.
That resonates with me. Like, you know, the solutions to all these problems they give us, like, you know, the false solution, in my opinion, is something which is very disempowering, which means like, oh, I need to get this. I need to be very knowledgeable about that. I need to go and get this very rare thing. I'm going to have to paint my house in a certain sort of like paint, or I'm going to wear clothing, which is going to be like, has like titanium threads in it. And it's like true solutions are always like, a true solution has to be within 100% of your control.
No, absolutely. I agree with you.
And like something like that, like, you know, that makes sense to me. And like the sugar and like, particularly with like the lily waves and like, just like the waves in general of like, you know, what happens? I don't know. This is me just like, kind of like, I didn't read those books. I just told you like what makes sense to me. You know, I think I've got a pretty good sense of stuff.
I have an even better idea, right? We've talked about like how much you and I both like the idea of just keeping a book we're interested in near us and hoping that we absorb. So maybe your absorption is so good that when I just sent you an email because you asked me to, with the titles of those books in it, and just by reading the title of the book off of the email, you vibrated the information right into your noggin.
I am 100% like, I do not like, I don't write that off as like not being possible. So definitely, like, you know, and when you say like, if we did not have sugar, like, you know, it's always like, you know, look over here, it's all the Wizard of Oz stuff, like, you know, all the fancy things, but it's simple. And it's like, no one wants to give up sugar because it is a bit of a pain in the ass if you're used to like eating like food, which they give us. And sugar tastes good. And like, who doesn't like to be high on food? And, you know, I mean, I get it. Like, you know, it's
one of the major trappings of this realm, right?
I would say it might be the major trapping. It might be the major trapping. I said something. Someone made a comment on a video I made, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I was talking about like wheat and the introduction of agriculture. And the guy who responded is like, this is coming from a master, I don't know, like someone who knows a lot about growing stuff. And he was like, it was when people first started growing wheat is when the parasites came. And he said the weeds. I'm not certain what I don't know what a weed is. Like, I don't know if that's just like, you know, one person's weed is another person's flower, or if a weed has an actual definition. But like, this guy seemed to know, he was very specific about his words. And, you know, when these things were added in, like, that's when the change happened.
Yeah, and parasites like sugar. Wheat breaks down to sugar.
Exactly.
Yeah,
parasites need it. It's the food of the parasites. And this is a parasitic realm. It's a parasitic realm.
Yeah. Isn't there, I forget like what, like folklore or fairy tale, or like, isn't there like the whole thing that like, if you get abducted by like some like fairies or some kind of like troll, like beings of another realm, make sure you never take any food from them, right? So I've often thought that maybe that's what happened to us, like how we got stuck here. Like maybe we like came from some realm inside the earth, and for some reason we came out here to explore, and we decided to have a little snack and we got stuck.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe we could. I think we're rounding out the hour, so it's like, you know, this might be a nice stop before we get into the second part. But I've been very aware of this. If I began on this show, I don't know, like a month or two ago, and I was talking about these different ideas as it related to this one British spy agency as it integrated in the United States. And I just was on the higher side chats, and I went into it really in depthly. But if you're familiar with that, I talked about this organization and then all of the people who came out from underneath it. And one of the people who came out from it was, God, I don't know how to pronounce his name. It might be Roald Dahl. He's the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Roald Dahl.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So if you notice in many of his novels, and we know he comes from that line of mind control, because I didn't even get into it in the videos or into the presentations, but it's all Tavistock. All of those guys get they originated Tavistock. It's all psychological warfare. And all of those children's books are all about sugar.
Yep.
They always have, like, Willy Wonka and his sugar. And they would go into these, like, great candy stores. And you would always see, and you'd see this both in Willy Wonka. I noticed this in Willy Wonka and then also in Mary Poppins. Like, they show them float. They always have a scene where people begin to float up. I'm like, why the fuck are they floating up? And why is always these British, like, these programming things about kids floating? Why are they getting them so high on sugar?
I can't remember if there's sugar or candy people in Wizard of Oz too, but there's also what was the first board, probably the first board game you had as a kid?
Candyland.
Candyland, right? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think that I agree with you. I think that's a good place to sort of wrap up this first part. You guys can join us at patreon.com/offplanetmedia for part 2. And you can find Michael and his work at susquehannaalchemy.com. We'll see you in a few minutes.